say, I'll just jump off right now. Say, Tyler, just for information purposes, Tyler Schneider is a partner of mine. He's been a partner at THL since August of this year. Congrats on that, Tyler, first and foremost. Well deserved. Yeah.
August of last year.
And one of the things, Tyler, whether not necessarily by choice, but a few of the cases that you've been extremely actively involved in you had a teething case that was out in California, which we can talk a little bit about, and you've become really active in what we call the NEC litigation, necrotizing enterocolitis. Rather than get into and we'll talk in a different forum and maybe later today about the details of those particular cases, but what I wanted to talk to you about is the unique situation of representing infants, toddlers, kids that have been injured. It presents kind of a different situation for a lawyer getting into a case like that. Is that right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, representing kids, when you represent a child, you're representing presumably the most vulnerable client you could ever have. You have somebody who's been hurt. They're not old enough, though, to make decisions, really. They're not totally old enough to understand what's going on. All they know is that they've been hurt. So you lean on their parents, you lean on their family, and sometimes that's not even stable enough to lean on. So you become kind of a defunct role model or somebody for that person to look up to guide them.
What does it, I assume, and we'll talk about the procedural hurdles and obstacles in a minute, but are there also, it sounds like there may be some sort of just emotional and moral hurdles or obstacles in representing kids.
Yeah. Look, anybody who has kids understands how easy it is to find yourself relating to that situation. You put yourself in that position and you look at it through a lens, even though you shouldn't. Sometimes in the cases like car accidents, we can separate ourselves because we see this isolated incident that we weren't involved with. But when you see a kid that's been hurt, who did nothing besides be a kid, and you're a parent or you're an uncle or you're an aunt, you can't help but become kind of emotionally attached to it. And it's not saying that you shouldn't or you should or whatnot. It's inevitable. It's part of being human. And so it's definitely something that you have to take a different vantage point at, and you have to recognize that, and you have to make sure it doesn't control you, because you can become, very emotionally linked to these cases.
How do you separate yourself from that? Is it something that you've learned to do, or are you able to even do it at all?
You learn to do it just by doing it. Every day you work on the case. You develop a little bit of a personality to the case. You understand it. You have to learn that the frustrations you feel about that case are frustrations that would probably be relevant if the case involved an adult. There's not a good answer. I wish I could tell you that eventually you get used to it, but you don't. You just learn to deal with it differently.
Do you feel like you have a different view towards a defendant that's done something to hurt a child versus a defendant that's done something to hurt an adult? I mean, I can tell you that I do. I don't know why. I don't apologize for it, but I can't help, if I were being honest, to admit that when innocent children are my clients, it raises it to a level that is a little bit different. And it's hard for me in that situation to be, we have to be professional with defendants. We have to be. And we have to work with defendants and defense lawyers. It gets a little bit tougher when I represent kids. Do you feel that as well?
There are a ton of safeguards when you represent a kid to make sure that we are doing everything we can to take care of that kid is being morally, ethically, and financially, fiscally, everything responsible. And that's right. It should be that way. a defendant who makes a product that a child uses should be held to the same standards, if not infinitely higher. So I do look at them differently. If you're going to profit off of being involved in kids' lives and giving them a product, then you have to take extreme precautions to protect that child. And if you can't handle that responsibility, don't sell to kids.
What a great way to say it. I couldn't agree more. Really well said. So let's switch over. You segued a little bit into the responsibilities that courts put upon lawyers that represent kids, innocent victims like kids. Let's talk about some of those, just to give you a little bit of a roadmap. When you get involved in the case and file a case on behalf of a child, lawyer can't just say, I'm going to represent this kid and then file a lawsuit. There's things you got to do it right, correct? And what are those?
It depends on what state you're in, what jurisdiction you're in, but generally you would have a parent or somebody act as the guardian for the child. And you would file the lawsuit with them kind of stepping in for the interests of the child. The child still has an independent claim that's protected, but there is an adult that can kind of make some of the legal decisions and stand in that role.
But wouldn't there be some? I mean, it seems like there'd be some parents that, in certain circumstances, may not always have the kid's best interests at heart, or frankly, some lawyers, unlike yourself, right, that may not have the child's best interest at heart. Are there protections for that are in place?
Yeah, so there's this two-step process, right? You got the step to get somebody in place to represent the child, somebody who has that legal connection to the child. And then when you get to the point where, let's say you have a verdict or you have a settlement or some type of resolution, now there's an extra layer of protection where the court comes in and says, I recognize that the child's here, I recognize that the mother's here, and I recognize that the attorney's here, but I want more. I want somebody who's removed from this to come in and tell me, is everything here look good? And so that's typically what we call a guardian ad litem. And those people are brought in to have a neutral eye, to look at it, to make sure that the lawyers are doing everything up to par, that the mom has the child's interest at heart, and that everything is on par for the kid. So it's step by step. There's always a layer to get through to protect the kids.
So it's suffice to say that it's more difficult to be a lawyer that represents kids than it is to be a lawyer that represents adults, right?
It is more difficult across the board. Both.
Is it worth it?
It is absolutely worth it. It is absolutely worth it as I watch my two daughters walk in the door. Yes, it is worth it.
Cool. How old are your kids?
I have a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old.
Right. And having those kids, how does that affect your ability to represent other kids?
That's a good question. It gives you drive. It gives you drive and it gives you pause. I'd be lying if I said that it didn't make things more difficult at times, because sometimes you get in situations where you've taken a case as far as you can take a case. There are some limitations and things you can't control, but you really wish you could take it further for that kid, because if it was your kid, you'd do everything in the world you can. But sometimes the law has limitations.
Here. I've got 3 kids, and I feel lucky and grateful that they're 21, 19, and 17. Certainly not out of the woods completely, but and when I work on these cases with you, it looks like one of them's coming over to say hello now, June. But when I find myself, when I'm working on these cases, it's a thing that I think lawyers don't pay enough of attention to, but it's empathy, right? And it helps me have that empathy, which makes it easier for me to present the case to the jury because I understand it. What are your thoughts on that? Hi, June.
June, can you say hi?
My daddy.
Yes.
James Browning.
The one thing that everybody can do, that every juror has the ability to, is to relate to and empathize with the child. And everybody wants to protect a kid. Doesn't matter if they have kids, if they never wanted to have kids. Everybody has that empathy. And so I agree with you that is the one thing that is consistent throughout, is that No matter what kind of case you have, if it involves a child, people always want to protect that child.
Well, Tyler, thanks for letting me bother you in your home, and now your kids are home, and go spend some time with them. But honestly,